Today on This Week Health.
We've gone and looked at the new smart hospitals that we're seeing are being built today. It's a very exciting time. And I'm hopeful that as the acceleration of the mobile devices and these digital platforms continue to evolve and accelerate, that also accelerates maybe that next iteration of what this could be for healthcare.
It's Newsday. My name is Bill Russell. I'm a former CIO for a 16-hospital system and creator of This Week Health, a channel dedicated to keeping health IT staff current and engaged. Special thanks to CrowdStrike, Proofpoint, ClearSense, MEDITECH, Cedars-Sinai Accelerator, TalkDesk, and Dr. First, who are our Newsday show sponsors for investing in our mission to develop the next generation of health leaders. All right, it's Newsday. And today we are joined by Christine Parent with MEDITECH. And Christine, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Bill. It's nice to be here again.
Well, it was nice to actually connect in person. We actually saw each other at the HIMSS event. I don't remember seeing you at the Vive event, but I did 30 interviews, so my mind's a little fuzzy.
Oh, MEDITECH was both at the HIMSS event, and we had a booth there, as well as where we've always been a Chime member for a number of years, but this was the first time they had a Vive conference, which has the health conference combined with the Chime. And so we also had a footprint there in a booth at the Vive. So really it was, as one person put it, two conferences back to back. So I think by the end of the HIMSS conference, people were ready to get home.
Yeah, I'm thinking of coming up with a new conference and doing like 3 back to back to back, seeing how that goes. No, I'll tell you, people who went to both were, especially the people who had booths and whatnot, they were tired at the end of that.
Yes.
That was a lot of work. I do want to talk to you a little bit about the conferences. Here's the thing I liked about Vive. They had standard size booths, right? So they didn't have the super booths where you could walk in and, I don't know, had multiple floors and living areas and you name it. And I felt like that sort of leveled the playing field a little bit. I liked that. I did like the speed dating with vendors.
Yes.
Talking
the
with
the match team, or they call it something to that respect, where you get to sign up and get 20 minutes with someone to talk through. They liked that, by the way. The feedback of some of the organizations that I know that sat through that thought that was a great way to meet a lot of people. And I thought that was well done that they did, and kind of infused a different type of energy.
Yeah, I heard a lot of positive things on the HIMSS event. HIMSS looked like HIMSS, right? So I had phenomenal events ahead of time. They had the CMIOs, the nursing informatics group got together, and I spent some time in there. They're doing some great work, and it was just, and they feed off each other. They share stuff and they feed off each other. That was fantastic. There was a leadership forum. The CIO forum, I think, morphed into the leadership forum because they had just had Chime, so probably could not get a quorum of just CIOs, but a lot of leaders in that room. There was a security event. So those day before events are phenomenal for networking and learning and those kind of things. And then I think I don't know about you, I will say I was surprised. People have told me up to 28,000. And they said, do you think there was 28,000 there? I'm like, well, if it wasn't 28, it was 25. It was close. It was not like they were fibbing by 10,000. It was pretty close to whatever that number was. It was well attended. And that was the surprise for me. But outside of that, it was pretty much a HIMSS conference and what we expect from a HIMSS conference.
Yes. And to your point, it was nice getting everyone back in person to either of the conferences. And I did think that they did a nice job. They did, I believe, condense a little bit of their footprint at HIMSS, so it wasn't so spread out amongst the conference areas. And I do think that lent itself to feel like it was a fuller conference, but also everything was very easy to get to, all in one area. But to your point, Bill, when you mentioned about Vive and coming from a company that has booths, you spent a year designing a HIMSS booth, and you work with different companies to put the footprint together. Having something like a Vive, where I call it a pop-up booth, where you have 3 styles in which to select from. You provide them with all the graphics. They go ahead and wrap it. So your folks that are actually showing up the day before everything's pretty much set up for you. You're not sending people out 3 or 4 days before to build it and then take it down. Different environment. I liked the concept of smaller areas. I thought it was much more easily accessible for people to get around. But I have to say that HIMSS, people didn't know, was it going to be well attended? I do think their attendance definitely increased. And I was with you. I was very surprised to see so many friends that I hadn't seen in about 2 or 3 years with everything going on. So
you have a marketing background as part of your role, and I talked to one booth participant who said, all in, they were at about $400,000 for the HIMSS booth. I'm not sure, by the way, if people are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe HIMSS is charging that much. I'm not sure the Vive booths were a deal. If I started rattling off the rates, I think people would go nuts. But but at the end of the day, all in, people traveling and you name it, about 400,000. And so that was one strategy. I talked to another startup that everybody would know because they get a lot of press, and they got a lot of press during the two conferences. And I said, what's your all-in cost? They're like, well, we had 4 people fly in, essentially a marketing person, a COO, a CEO, and somebody else. And I'm like, how did you get so much play? It's like, well, we had lined up interviews, we had lined up all this other stuff, and they got a lot of play. Now, I guess my question to you is, what's the strategy? Or do you look at it more like, are these events marketing plays or are they sales plays? I think this is where we get lost, because people are like, oh, the CIOs weren't at the HIMSS event, therefore we weren't talking to as many buyers. And I'm trying to figure out what the mindset is going into these.
Well, I think it's probably different depending on what your product or service is. And I know for us anyways, we don't consider it just a marketing or sales thing. We actually combine the two because we have current customers that we want to show the latest and greatest. We have new prospects that we want to be able to provide an environment for them to come to our booth to see what we have, who we are. We want to make sure that leadership is available for them to schedule meetings with. So for us, having a booth or a location makes sense. For some of the ones that are up and coming, I know that a lot of them, especially at Vive, they had the smaller footprints that were kind of more on the outskirts, and you walked up and you kind of heard about what their organization did. I know a couple of our partners that had just meeting rooms at HIMSS, but that goes to a smaller space. How do you get your word out? Obviously, you're probably not doing a lot of software presentations or service discussions. So it probably depends on what your product is. And for us, I don't think we'll ever get rid of the booth concept, but do we structure that a little differently? And do we have more mini pop-up booths in different areas depending on what the subject is?
Yeah, we could go into this for a while, and I may hit you up later for some of these things. Like, when you get the map, are you thinking, oh, I got to be near a door, I need to be near, I'm sure there's a whole logic to it, but I want to get to some of the stories that you picked out here. Let's start with CMIO 3.0, how the Chief Medical Information Officer role has evolved. And this story is really looking at the life of 3 CMIOs, CT Lin, MD at UC Health in the Rockies area. You have Natalie Pageler, 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 yep, Stanford Children's Health. And then you have, let's see, C. William Hanson III, MD, CMIO, Penn Medicine in Philadelphia. And they use that as a backdrop to have this conversation around how the CMIO role has changed. And I know back in the day, so back in 2011, we did a major EHR consolidation. And really the CMIO was pretty much the lead on that. That was the sort of the role, the EHR implementation. Coming out of that, they became the head of optimization, which never ends. But they became the head of optimization. And now the role is really evolving as more tools and new technologies come into play. What struck you about this article?
First of all, I agree with you. I think that when we started to see this in our customer base, it was probably the early 2010s. So you were right on the cusp of leading that charge, Bill, because these were in some cases relatively new titles that were being introduced. And a lot of it was, I think, the push for meaningful use and trying to do these upgrades to big EHR systems. So they put in the CMIO to act as that facilitator with the physicians to make sure that they were moving them along. And I'm with you. I think optimization for the next decade got a bad word associated with it, and a lot of that fell to the CMIOs. I love the concept, and what struck me with this is how the role has evolved and how the CMIO really has made it to more of a strategic player. The concept of not necessarily actually having that dotted line or reporting up to the CIO, but really more on the CEO driving the strategy, being involved in more things that are maybe not just always in what we'd consider the traditional wheelhouse. And I think this pandemic also created a visibility to that role that in many cases, I know the CMIO and CMO were out there talking to the community about vaccinations. In some cases, they were at the board level talking about.
They've really become leaders. I mean, it's
really.
So you touched on a couple of things here, and it's in the article. So let's see. CT Lynn says, like many other CMIOs, he gradually took on more and more responsibility until they gave him the CMIO title. And he said, I actually had to grow into the title as well. He said, initially I was just managing myself. And that's the CMIO was sort of that standalone person. He goes, now I have 25 people.
Yeah, right.
And so it does become a leader of people. That's one of the aspects of it. They now somewhat manage a budget. So they have to go in front of the board, have conversations. During the pandemic, they went in front of the board, I'm sure, pretty often in terms of capabilities. But also they talk about a new set of tools that are starting to emerge where they're becoming strategic, as you mentioned. AI, population health efforts, patient engagement efforts, they tend to be right there at the center of those conversations. And this is one of the few times where somebody has given it a 3.0 title, where I can really see 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. And 3.0 is how are you going to lead transparency around your AI models and your algorithms and work with the clinicians to make sure you're adopting the right tools. Population health efforts are massively challenging with the data sets that you have to acquire, understand how to aggregate them, look at the social determinants data and bring that into the clinical workflow and partnerships into that workflow. And then patient engagement is something I think that you'll find this interesting. I think it lives in between operations, technology, and marketing. This is the one area we don't talk about, but patient engagement probably needs more health system marketing people at the table.
Absolutely. And we're seeing that, Bill, by the way. So we are seeing where some of these patient engagement programs are actually being led from a leadership perspective by the chief marketing officer. And in many cases, we are seeing that some of the larger institutions really morphing and changing that role. I'm seeing more CMOs showing up at some of these healthcare conferences than ever before, and speaking on panels and talking about the secret sauce in which they did to engage, because I do think that there's something to that. But just to add one thing, because you talked about someone that is morphing early in 1.0 or 2.0 iteration, he was a physician or she was a physician first, had an interest in some sort of either implementation or IT, and all of a sudden got this new title. So what we're seeing when we talk about AI, you talk population health, which you have to add interoperability to all of that, these new digital platforms. You talk about patient engagement, so you're talking apps, app development, again, digital health platform. Now there's programs to send these physicians to learn those IT components and certifications. And I do believe you were at the Vive conference in Chime, and Chime is also starting their own set of different courses and different certifications and graduate programs, really to help move along some of even the physician leadership, which I think is interesting. And that was also something that came through in the article.
Yeah, it did. Towards the end here, one thing that is relatively new for CMIOs is board certification in informatics that will soon require having completed a fellowship. We are now in our 7th year of clinical informatics fellows. Our program is growing like gangbusters. Stanford Children's Pagler says our graduates are ending up all over the world in really incredible leadership positions. It'll be interesting to see if this will eventually become the only path to becoming a CMIO. So that's interesting. Penn Medicine's Hansen said he's increasingly working with younger clinicians who have substantial experience, either from a research perspective or they are experienced data scientists just from their work in college and whatnot. So that is really fascinating to see. And I think we're going to see more colleges and universities step up and more programs be developed, especially at the academic medical centers. And this whole idea of board certified CMIOs across the board probably going to be the trend. So people are probably going to start lining up for those certifications, and for good reason. It's a very complex world that we live in. We'll get to our show in just a minute. As you've probably heard, we've launched a new show, Town Hall, on our community channel, This Week Health Community, and it airs on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'll be taking a back seat to some of these people who are on the front lines. Town Hall is hosted by an array of talented healthcare leaders who are facing today's challenges head on. We're going to hear from professionals and their networks on hot button issues, technical deep dives, and the tactical challenges that healthcare faces. We have some great hosts on this. We have Charles Boise and Angelique Russell, data scientists, Craig Richardville, Lee Milligan, Reed Steffen, who are all CIOs. We have Jake Lancaster and Brett Oliver, who are CMIOs, and Matt Sickles, a cybersecurity first responder. I'd love to have you listen to these episodes. You can subscribe on our community channel, This Week Health Community, wherever you find and listen to podcasts. Now, let's get to the show. All right, I talked to Helen Waters from MEDITECH about their Google announcement, about your Google announcement, but I want to go to Mayo's Google announcement. We'll come back to MEDITECH in a minute. Mayo Clinic assessing Google AI tool as it seeks more insights from patient records. The healthcare provider says Google's healthcare NLP, natural language API, could help clinicians determine whether certain patients are at a higher risk for disease. And this is the kind of thing that people are tapping into Google for. So Mayo Clinic said it is assessing a product from Google Cloud that uses AI to better track and analyze language-based information in the patient's EHR. The technology known as NLP has made its stride in recent years, says experts, although it remains in its early days. He goes on to say some 80% of the patient data in electronic medical records is unstructured. That's still amazing, but I guess that's the case, including transcribed reports and doctor's notes. Dr. Annan Trayman said NLP allows the hospital system to turn that data that isn't organized into discrete fields into structured data, meaning clinicians will have an easier time searching and analyzing it. So this becomes about, first of all, unlocking that data for starters. But this is where it really dovetails into the MEDITECH announcement. It becomes about the clinicians being able to find and access that data very quickly, because they're seeing 12, 13 patients this hour, and they can't be digging through this file cabinet of stuff and reading PDFs and whatever the unstructured data is. They got to be able to search it. And so they're using NLP to make discrete data elements and maybe do some other things. MEDITECH, you guys are using their search capabilities, right?
We're using their search and summarization. So as you mentioned, they have their own product that they're going to be going to market, and they've made their announcement. We've taken some of those components from that Care Studio product, which is some of the tools, and actually embedded it within our toolbox in our EHR, and it's the search and summarization. But to your point, it is trying to actually create a holistic view of the patient. And it's looking at different areas, whether different care areas, or to your point, different documents that may not be discrete data. An example I'll give you is for legacy systems, as you've done upgrades or whatnot, there's some scanned documents out there. So being able to actually get and process and go through scanned documents, an individual like Bill Russell, Dr. Bill Russell, who has a patient in front of him, is not going to probably go through a scanned document for data, but there might be data in there that would allow you to treat the patient better. So having a search and summarization that goes through, just very similar, I think, to what you explained here, going through and doing the NPL and those documents, you're able to actually get that information and bring it back discreetly and actually put it as part of the summarization. And that that is something that they do well. And to be honest, we obviously put out a press release, and you've talked about it. But the physician and the patient really don't care who does that search and summarization. They just want to be treated well, and the physician should never know that it's quote unquote a Google tool that provided that data for them. It should be.
Every time this comes up, we have to talk about privacy, because I saw somebody who made a very cogent argument on patient data and patient privacy and whatnot, and they used the Google MEDITECH announcement, and underneath I said, you used the wrong story. This has absolutely nothing to do with that. There's no patient data that's moving. Right. No one's making money from this aspect of it. I'm like, if you want to, and I'm like, here's three stories you should look at if you're worried about patient data being used to make money for somebody without the patient's consent. But that's not what this is about. This is just about the benefit to me is the clinician benefits, just productivity and ability to really spend more time with the patient. I benefit as a patient because they're going to have more information at their fingertips. And hopefully by having that information at their fingertips, they don't have to ask me the same battery of questions every time I come in, or at least not as long a battery of questions. And the information they need will be there so that they can provide better care and maybe pay a little bit more attention to me rather than the computer.
Perfect. And that's really what we're going for. And I agree with you on the privacy. We're working with them on the development of this. And that is the first and foremost, the top of what is on MEDITECH's mind, to make sure that we do everything right, that we cross our T's, dot our I's. And the data is still the institution, the healthcare system's data. It's still the patient's data. It's not owned by anyone else, and it's not shared with anyone else. But it does, to your point, create a longitudinal record that I think is what we're all aiming for. And to your point, just to make sure that you're getting back to that patient-provider relationship without a lot of document searching in between.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to close on this story: why the future of healthcare is mobile. And I love the sentence that starts with, 5 years ago, healthcare providers didn't see mobile as a priority or as a necessary tool in improving the patient experience. And then it just ends with this: the pandemic changed that.
Oh,
it did change that, didn't it? Really, everything went mobile. I mean, now granted, some people are at home on their desktops, but meaning everything changed during the 2.5 years that we've gone through this pandemic, of how clinicians want to view the data, where they want to view the data, how they want to share the data. And a lot of that has changed our thinking on architecture. I hear CIOs all the time talking about cloud architecture, and I'm like, thank God, they've been talking about this since 2010.
Exactly.
But now they're all saying, hey, we can't do it without it. I'm like, yeah, that is absolutely true. The world changed over the last 2 years. What struck you about this article?
So this is one of the first ones that really struck me, because from a MEDITECH standpoint anyways, I will agree with you that the rest of the industry has kind of just perked up during the pandemic and kind of absorbed and moved forward and leaned forward in this direction. But I will tell you, I think that I've probably mentioned before that our new Expanse platform was built 10 years ago and was all based on web mobile, knowing that this was the direction that we believed the industry and technology, and so not necessarily to build on, but to completely recreate and redesign a post-meaningful use with the technology that was available. And I will tell you, when we first started to deploy it and tried to put smartphones and tablets in the nurses and physicians' hands, we did have some challenges where people wanted to go back to maybe more of a hybrid model. And so I think that we've worked through those challenges, and the ones that are the higher satisfying areas or organizations have really embraced the mobile strategy. Now, fast forward 8+ years, you're going through the pandemic. We've talked about digital technology. We talked about the rise of patient experience, and you're now looking at it, and this is a must-have. This isn't a we need this right now. The mobility creates and improves communication. It expands what your digital platform is to be able to expose yourself to some of these apps for consumer engagement. So I will say this one at least struck a chord for me because we knew we would get here. I think there was just some segments of the industry that was just slower to adopt and see the
Yeah.
importance of moving to this
Well,
strategy.
I'll tell you from a CIO's perspective, one of the biggest challenges was, hey, CIO, we need 1,000 more tablets or 1,000 more phones. It's
Right.
like, okay, we'll get that in the budget somehow. But I'll tell you,
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll tell you the other thing is I tell this story from time to time. I don't think I tell it all that often, although my father's here and he tells the same stories over and over again. So I might fall into this category. And I had a guy on my staff, Mustafa Kirzada, and he came to me and said, Bill, the future is mobile. And this was back in like 2013. I'm like, oh, okay, what do you want me to do about it? He goes, just give me a little bit of money and let me run with this idea. And his idea was that we wouldn't have PCs in any of the rooms. And he took an Android device and had a Citrix client on it. And he showed that he could run MEDITECH, our standard MEDITECH, on it at the time. Now with Expanse, this would have been so much easier. But essentially, and they could go from room to room and just drop it into this holder, and it would then go up onto the screen, and there would be a keyboard there, and they'd have a full-blown Citrix session. So they were really running off the workstation in the cloud, and they could do this, and then they could go to the next room, pop it in, do the next one, and that kind of stuff. And even that's probably by today's standards, well, actually by today's standards, it would still be warp speed compared to what we're still putting machines in every one of the rooms. And I think there's a case to be made that if you fast forward 10 years from now, the standard PC box will not be in the room. There will be some sort of voice recognition box when you walk in. The TV will be somehow linked so that you can just put whatever you want up on that screen. You can pull up something from your phone. You can watch TV. You can do all sorts of things. And I used to say that thing and say, well, that's the future. That's Buck Rogers kind of stuff. But I mean, all those things I just sort of rattled off, we could do today. If somebody sort of takes the time and really thinks through the future patient room, I think it'll look really different. It will definitely be mobile. And that's not even taking into account that our nurses are now being dispatched to homes. And so it'll definitely be mobile. The MEDITECH vision of people are going to be taking the EHR with them to people's homes was pretty forward thinking at the time. And I think it's going to serve you well, especially as we start to move into the home.
Yeah, and then you just mentioned the next iteration of the ambient listening, which we talked about, kind of more the frictionless, like, is there going to be a device? What would the device potentially look like? That's all being looked at right now. There's some technology that's out there that I know that we've gone and looked at the new smart hospitals that we're seeing are being built today in time. No drop lines in the rooms. So it's a very exciting time. And I do think, I'm hopeful that as the acceleration of the mobile devices and these digital platforms continue to evolve and accelerate, that also accelerates maybe that next iteration of what this could be for healthcare.
Fantastic. Christine, as always, great to catch up with you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Perfect. Thank you, Bill.
What a great discussion. If you know of someone that might benefit from our channel from these kinds of discussions, please forward them a note, perhaps your team, your staff. I know if I were a CIO today, I would have every one of my team members listening to a show just like this one. It's conference level value every week. They can subscribe on our website, thisweekhealth.com. They can also subscribe wherever they listen to podcasts, Apple, Google, Overcast. You get the picture. We are everywhere. Go ahead, subscribe today. We want to thank our Newsday sponsors who are investing in our mission to develop the next generation of health leaders. Those are CrowdStrike, Proofpoint, ClearSense, MEDITECH, Cedars-Sinai Accelerator, TalkDesk, and Dr. First. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.